Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast for agency owners, hosted by agency veteran and coach Steve Guberman. Agency Bytes is a podcast focused on delivering actionable agency information from agency experts in about 25 minutes. Why 25 minutes? Because who has the attention span for much more these days? And you can squeeze in a listen between meetings with time for a bathroom break or coffee refill before your next meeting.
Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast dedicated to helping creative entrepreneurs thrive. I'm Steve Guberman from Agency Outsight, where I coach agency owners to build the business of their dreams. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Chip Griffin. He's the founder of the Small Agency Growth Alliance, SAGA. Chip helps small PR and marketing agency owners build businesses they love by growing profits, reducing overwork, and improving overall satisfaction. He's got 30 years of experience as an agency owner and entrepreneur. Chip brings a wealth of wisdom, hard-earned lessons, and real-world insights to the table that he delivers through coaching and some really great podcasts. Chip, I am honored to have you. Thanks for joining me.
I am so excited to be here, Steve, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, this for me, this is like one of those episodes where it's like I've watched you and listened to you for longer than I can remember, and so to have you as a guest is a huge honor. So excited to kind of dig into some things. You've got a pretty cool background as far as how you got into the agency space and started to, cutting your teeth in the agency world. You want to kind of give that quick background for those that don't know you. Maybe there's one or two people out there left that don't know who you are and what your background is.
Oh, there's more than that, but I appreciate the sentiment and all that. Look, I got my start in politics in Washington, D.C. 30 plus years ago. As many people in politics do, they bounce around to different things. So I ended up going to a PR agency for a period of time as a junior account executive. So that was my first exposure to agency life. And then through a few other moves and all of that sort of thing, I decided I was going to leave Washington and go back to New England after I got married. My wife was from Massachusetts. I was from New Hampshire. And like all good unemployed political people, I called myself a consultant instead of unemployed. And so I was fortunate enough to sign up my first agency client before I even left Washington, and have done a variety of different agency roles, started a software company to support PR agencies and a lot of different things over the last couple of decades.
Love it. Now you partner with Ginny and you put out some podcast content with her and just tons and tons of really great content. So anybody who's listening, go to the SAGA website and, plug into, I think you got 2 podcasts up there now.
Yes, I have 2 active podcasts, the Agency Leadership podcast with Ginny Dietrich and also the Chats with Chip podcast, which is my interview series.
Yeah, love it. All good stuff. They're on my regular pings of downloads. So thank you for all the great content. So I want to talk about what does it take to build the agency that an owner wants to own? But we're creative entrepreneurs. We own a business. Isn't it already what I want to own? And no, obviously not. There's the accidental entrepreneurship and accidental business owner. And, I just want to be a designer. And now suddenly I've got to manage clients and all that. And, agency owners, they'll come to you and say, help me fix this thing. Help me, build a business that I want to own. And what are some of those big red light indicators that you see they come to you with?
Yeah, look, I think you have to start by committing to actually building a business that you want to own. Too many people will come to me, as I'm sure they do to you, and say, this is where I'm at in my business. What should I be doing next? What do companies my size do? And
right.
And the reality is that it's different, because what you want, what I want, what our clients want, they may be different things. And so you have to understand, what do you want from the business? How much money do you want to make? How much do you need to make? How many hours a week do you want to work? What kind of work do you want to be doing? How much flexibility do you want? Define those personal goals, and then you can shape the business around that, and you'll be much happier. I know plenty of agency owners who, on paper, they've got a great business. The P&L looks fantastic. They're miserable because they're not doing what they want. They're not serving the clients they want. They're not taking home what they need to take home. There's no sense to do that.
Yeah. You're like singing praises to the things that I see so many so much content out there. It's like, if you're not making X MRR or, whatever, and it's like these, I just call them copycat goals. And it's like, no, get back to what really matters is, why did you launch this thing? What do you want to be doing all day long? How many hours do you want to work in that day? How much money do you need for your family and to support your team and the things that really matter? And then build the platform from there. So yeah, I love that. Those are the initial things that people need to be asking about.
Yeah, and there's so much rotten advice out there that you've just alluded to, right?
Yeah.
Because there are people out there, and I get asked all the time about benchmarks. I hate benchmarks. Benchmarks drive me batty because, people will say, well, you need to have $200,000 in revenue per employee. Well, I mean, that may have worked in the olden days when everybody had offices and you had kind of fairly similar structures. Now with so many different structures and people located in all sorts of different, your cost basis is so different.
Yeah.
That's not a good way to think about it. Even just talking about your business in terms of headcount or revenue doesn't make sense because you can't take those things to the bank. You can take profit to the bank. So if you're going to focus on a number, focus on that one. That's the one that makes a difference to you as the owner.
But aren't those other things kind of pointing to the profit? So like if I've got an employee and while, yeah, the overhead is not what it used to be, do I still want to 3X their, total cost to me, or like point to what that profit's going to be comprised of?
Yeah, so they certainly can, but I guess my point would be that it's not always the case, and so you can lose track of things if you focus on, what some guru has told you is the critical metric.
Yeah.
And the problem is that in looking at ratios, right? So if I'm going to be charging for my work, I do generally want to charge at least 2 and hopefully 3 times the total cost of delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, I'll probably have a pretty good profit margin. But that doesn't necessarily equate to $200,000 per employee, because if I've got cheaper employees, that may only be $100,000 and I may still get there. And so you need to know your own numbers. And I would say you need to know your numbers per client and per project, not just what's on your master P&L, because looking just at a master P&L, you lose sight of a lot of issues, and a lot of ills can be covered up because you've got one really profitable client that's subsidizing all of the others. And you need to know that because it helps you to figure out who your ideal client is that you then want to add to your roster.
So dig more into that, as far as don't just look at the bottom line P&L, which so many agencies don't do, but when they do, that's all they focus on. Dig more into, let's focus on the client and project part of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there's an inordinate number of articles and books and podcasts and videos about pricing. Mm-hmm. And all of these pricing, the advice you always hear is you need to use value pricing. Mm-hmm. First of all, I would tell you that half the people who promote value pricing don't even understand what it actually is. and most of the time when I encounter an agency owner who says they're using value pricing, they're just talking about we're doing fixed pricing. Right. It has nothing to do with actual value. And so what I encourage is, as you're thinking about how you're going to price work, how you're going to service clients, start with a project budget. Figure out what it's going to take to actually implement the work and get the results that the client is expecting. Mm-hmm. And then it can help you come up with that price floor. So my philosophy on pricing is floor to ceiling pricing. Yep. So you start with that floor. You make sure you're not losing your shirt. Just figure out, what is that? And usually that's double your cost. If you double your cost, you're usually going to come out at least break even, so you're not in trouble. You certainly want to go higher. You want to get closer to 3 or perhaps higher on that multiple. But you keep testing your way up until you find that ceiling, until you meet real price resistance. And you need to be tracking your estimates at the start of the project versus what you're actually doing, because we all overservice. Yeah, 100% of agencies overservice. And it gets worse the longer you're working with a client. So you need to have these budgets. You need to track it over time and understand what you're actually doing if you want to price correctly, if you want to find the right clients for growth.
Yeah, it's so true. The longer you work with a client, the better the relationship is, the more they feel like they can just kind of keep hitting you up. Maybe your friends, you're talking about T-ball or whatever. By the way, can you do this other thing for me? And you're like, oh, sure, I'll just crank it out. And there's another hour you just threw at them for free. Yeah.
Yeah, and you end up accumulating scope debt, yep. Because you simply you add things, but you almost never take things away. Yeah. And so I always talk about with clients, you have a bell curve of profitability, right? So at the start of an engagement, you have relatively low profits because you're getting up to speed, you're learning them, you're learning their processes, maybe you're learning their industry if you haven't focused and specialized properly. And so you have pretty low profits at the beginning. Then you become more efficient, you're producing the results, so you now maximize your profit. But at some point, because of scope creep, because you're afraid of losing the client, you start to overservice. And so now your profit's going down. You need to know that. And if you're tracking it, you can see those things and try to adjust them sooner rather than later. Because if you wait until it's a crisis point, that relationship is probably not salvageable.
So you're a proponent for time tracking?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
you're not. Look, I mean, anyone who says you shouldn't do time tracking it would be like going into a restaurant and not knowing their food costs.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense at all.
Yep.
And so you absolutely need to do time track. Now, that doesn't mean you need to do it in, 5-minute intervals like a lawyer or something like that and sit there and have the timer running on your screen, but you got to have a pretty good handle on it.
Yeah.
And I get a kick out of these articles that we see in Adweek and other places where some agency says, we did away with timesheets, we're not doing it anymore. And then later in the article, it'll say something like, well, we just, we estimate percentages. That's time tracking.
Yeah.
Right. You're still doing the same thing. You're just getting about it a different way. You got to know what your cost of delivery is. Otherwise, you're not really running a business. It's a hobby.
And I'd also argue that same agency that's trying to boost culture and saying we're getting rid of timesheets is in a year bringing it back, because some CFO somewhere is saying, how do we know what we're doing? And so they're bringing it back.
Well, the thing is, I mean, what I find is that the reason why, I mean, look, we all hate timesheets, right? Well, I'm going to accept that. I track my own time. I hate doing it. I hated doing it as an agency and all that.
Yep.
But part of the problem with employees is that we never explain to them how it's useful to them. So they look at it as Big Brother looking over their shoulder. And we do stupid things like telling them, we expect you to bill this amount of time for this client and no more, or we expect this level of utilization.
Mm-hmm.
You start doing that, and what are they going to do? They're going to feel like it's an attack on them. They're probably going to start lying on those timesheets. I can tell you as a junior account executive, I had specific standards for the number of hours per client. Guess what? My timesheet always met those standards. Did that accurately represent what I was doing? Absolutely not. But I didn't want to get yelled at by the client for not doing the work that was requested. And I didn't want to get yelled at by the boss for not reporting the time in the way that they wanted it. That doesn't make, you got to know the actual numbers. Yeah. And you've got to explain to your employees that by tracking time, we know when to add additional resources. We know when you're overburdened and we can shift things away. They need to see a benefit to timesheets and not just see it as a burden.
Yeah, I fully agree. I was raised on timesheets. I actually just recently in this business stopped tracking time. And there wasn't really a methodology behind it other than I wasn't accessing the data to really define what was it doing for me, But I think on an agency side, if I had when I had employees on the agency side, absolutely we were tracking time. And it wasn't, there was transparency to it. Why are we doing it? Well, because I want to know, are we losing money on these clients? Are we losing money on these projects? Exactly like you said, digging into the, different levels of things. But also, do you need more help? Do you need more support? Are you overworked? I don't see every minute you're putting into everything. And, so this is a way to give me insight into it. So, yeah.
Right. And you touched on something important there. You stopped because you weren't using it.
Right.
And I think we need to remember this with all of the data we collect, not just timesheets. If we're collecting the data, we ought to be using it. And if we're not using it, we should stop collecting it. And with timesheets, that really rears its ugly head because look, we go sit there and we watch the demos and get sold by the sales rep at the, the various tracking software companies. And it's, we can track, the who it's with and the meeting type and all of these different things. That stuff never gets used. So keep your time tracking simple. Just how much time, what client. And that's in most cases, that's all you really need. You might need to add project if there are multiple projects for a client, but stop with the getting it so granular because you're never using that data. And that is what becomes a real burden to the team.
I also think it doesn't matter if you're doing wireframes or high fidelity design. None of that matters. You know that Joe Smith is the designer. And so if they track, 30 hours for a project, that's in the design bucket. Keep it as simple for the tactical team as possible.
Yeah, and if from time to time you need to dig a little deeper, fine. For you can say for a week we want to track with more granularity so that we can figure out exactly how this is splitting, between getting feedback and doing original work or whatever. And for that short period of time you get that extra data and it informs decision making, but don't do it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also love the floor to ceiling model of pricing. And I think value based is kind of obscure in how to actually, do it properly, but by and large, I know what my cost for delivery is. And so I want to, make 30% profit this year, which means I need to add 30% to everything that we're putting out there, hopefully more. The ceiling part you're talking about is gauging a client's true, the value of the work that we're doing. And, if I know it's going to cost with profit 50 grand, I know they're going to pay 70. Can I get that extra margin out of them is kind of the ceiling that you're referring to, right?
Yeah, and part of that comes from, frankly, if there's work that I've traditionally done at $5,000, the next time I bid that same work, I try to charge $6,000 and see if I get price for it. And you just kind of keep gradually moving up until people start, consistently saying, no, that's too much. You got to be careful though, because people, people will use budget as an excuse, right? It's a lot gentler way than saying, Steve, I didn't really like you. I didn't vibe with your team. I don't think you can do the job. You just say, it's not really in our budget. And so you've got to be really careful when you hear that budget feedback, not to over rely on it until you see them go hire someone else for similar work at a lower price.
Yeah. And I don't believe that we want to be in a race to the bottom, telling
No.
agencies it's not where you want to be.
No, I mean, look, if nobody's objecting to your price, then you clearly need to be raising your price, right? There needs to be some level of resistance.
Yeah. Where in your, view of scope does niching fall into building that agency that somebody wants to own and enjoys running?
Yeah. So look, I think you need to have, I call it finding focus rather than niching down, mostly because I think when people hear niching down, they start to think immediately about industry verticals. Yeah. And you can find focus in ways that aren't necessarily within specific verticals, but you absolutely need to be focused. I mean, the whole notion of, we're a full service marketing firm who can help anybody with anything. Look, you gotta be able to say something. And here's why. Because if I come to you and say, I'm looking for some clients and Steve, I'm a full service marketing firm. I can work for anybody. It makes it really hard for you to think of people to refer to me. Yep. But if I tell you that, I work primarily with professional service firms that are between 10 and 50 employees and they're located in the Northeast. Okay, now my mental Rolodex can zero in on some likely suspects. And so for no other reason than that, it helps. But it also helps because your team starts to become more expert in what they're doing. What does that mean? You can produce better results for clients, improve their satisfaction, and you can also do it more efficiently, more profit for you. So there are so many wins to be had. You just need to find some kind of focus and stick with it. Doesn't mean you can't change it over time, but you got to have something to start with.
Yeah. How do you, respond to the argument of, oh, my team's going to get bored if all we do is fintech or law firms or whatever, and that kind of nonsense?
Yeah, look, I mean, you don't have to find focus such that there are only 10 eligible clients. In fact, that's probably not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
And so, even if you're working with just law firms, let's say, there are a lot of different law firms out there. And even two different personal injury law firms, they're going to be different personalities. They're serving different markets. There's enough different that you ought to still be able to be creative. Yeah. And also, I would say that finding focus doesn't mean that from time to time you can't take on some other interesting project. There's no rule that says once you have your focus, that's it. You've got to say no to everybody else. It simply means that you're trying to attract people who are more likely than not to be good fits because you can get results for them and profits for yourself. And if you're talking in that way, you'll get the referrals. People will come to your website to look at it and say, I see myself here. When you start talking to them in a pitch, you'll be able to use the language. You won't be sitting there saying, I don't really know how folks in your industry talk, and I don't know what these terms are. And so you don't ask stupid questions. You get to know it, and that's really helpful.
I remember we had an opportunity to pitch a credit union. And we work with small community banks, but never a credit union. And they use totally different vernacular. And so we would say banking and this and that, and be like, we don't. Somehow we still won the business, and it was a very long-term client. We did a lot of great work for them, but it was the same thing. Like, oh shoot, we're idiots. Like we just didn't know the terminology, and over time we became experts in credit unions, small community banks and things like that. So that was a niche that we focused on. But yeah, I get the point that if you don't know the language and the terminology and how they do things and the faux pas in the industry, I also think it's imperative to know where to market and what events to go to and what LinkedIn groups to join or wherever you want to attract business. You can't be all things to everybody everywhere. So knowing where to be and that kind of thing, I think is really important.
Well, and you've already mentioned the creativity angle, which is one of the pushbacks you tend to get when I'm talking about focus. The other one you get is that, geez, I'm freezing myself out of all of these other opportunities. I'm afraid I won't be able to find business. The exact opposite is true. And look, most small agencies, most mid-sized agencies even, only have about 10 or 15 clients active at any one time. Right. If you're a digital agency that's doing, high volume SEO or something like that, okay, well, I'm setting you aside. I think you're more of a service provider than an agency anyway, but we'll debate that some other day.
We'll split those hairs later. Yeah.
most of you who are listening to this, in all likelihood, and certainly most of the agencies I work with, you've got 10 to 15 clients at any given time. You don't need a giant pool. You don't need a pipeline of 1,000 prospects to get there. You need some good people who are good fits for you, and those are the people you need to try to convert. It's a lot more efficient, it's a lot more enjoyable, and frankly, it's a lot more profitable in the end.
Yeah. What do you think from the ownership standpoint is missing when they take a step back and they look at the shop that they've built? Let's say they're 8, 10, 12 people, something like that. What are like the most common pain points that like they have as their day to day, or just what they want to fix for themselves, really?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of them want to try to get control over their own day. The vast majority of them feel like they're working too many hours and not on the right stuff. And those are things as the owner that you absolutely can control and you should control. So I always encourage owners to start there. Don't worry about, what, Sally or Joe is doing. Focus on what you're doing. Figure out how you're going to change that. That may change Sally's role or Joe's role. You may need to add people, remove people, whatever, but start with yourself and figure out what you want your ideal day to look like. What do you want to be spending time on? How much time do you want to be spending? And usually that means pulling yourself out of client service, because most 10, 15 person agencies, the owner is still in way too much client service. Now, if that's what you love to do and that's why you want to own the agency, fine, but you now got to come up with a new structure that meets the gap that you've created by putting yourself in that much client service. So start there, figure that out. And I think that's probably the most common pain point. And frankly, it's the thing that if you can solve it, makes the owner the most happy. Even if they don't increase their revenue, they don't increase their number of clients, they don't even sometimes put more money in their pocket. If they get control over their day, they feel so much better.
Yeah. I think a lot of owners, when they pull themselves out of the day-to-day client work, delivery work, whatever, the reason why they started the business in the first place. I love design, I love code, I love strategy, whatever. And all they're doing is top level CEO stuff or biz dev, writing proposals. They're like, this grind is not what I wanted. So how do I shift the stuff that they are doing off their plate into, getting out of owner-led sales? That's a whole other podcast episode. And then carving out time so they can do the design work that they love doing or things like that. And I think that that's like a big shift that, a lot of agency owners struggle with, because that's delivery. I can hire a designer for a fraction of, what I should be making. So
right. And look, I'm not saying that owners need to take themselves out of all of the client service stuff, because a lot of us do enjoy that kind of work. But you need to figure out how to put yourself in the high level portion of that as opposed to the day to day. So if you're a PR agency owner, be in the strategy sessions, use the creative thinking for those things. Don't be involved in writing or editing press releases, sending them out. For God's sakes, leave that to juniors. Focus on the high value stuff that has a real impact. You'll frankly enjoy that more than doing the grunt work in most cases.
Yeah, strategy, relationship building, accounts, things like that. Absolutely, I agree 100%. Yeah. So, all right, we've kind of figured out there is no, skeleton key magic potion for the exact formula. There's a ton of different variables from, what to charge, profitability, what the owner should be doing. But when they kind of, pull those levers in the right way, they can build the agency that they look forward to running and that they want to be a part of every day and have a path forward for. And shoot, maybe those are the things that make it attractive for an acquisition at some point as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there. The things that, and people talk about built to sell and things like that. I prefer build to own because, first of all, I want it to be a forward-looking thing as opposed to a retrospective. But I also want you to focus on something that you are actually enjoying in the moment at this time, because the stark reality is that the vast majority of agencies never get sold. Those that do get sold, in most cases, it's not for a life-changing amount of money.
Right.
The number of strings attached are far more than people realize. You read built to sell and it ends with the guy going off, driving off into the sunset as if he's suddenly gotten this massive check and he's done. He's not. He's got an earnout that's going to last 3 to 5 years. And guess what? He's now becoming an employee after having been for 10, 20, maybe more years, been his own boss. And now he's someone else's employee. That's a tough transition. Not to mention that the money is not nearly as good as people think it is in most cases. There are certainly the outliers, and you hear about those. But I have so many owners come to me and say, look, I'm looking to sell my business. It's my retirement money. I need to get out in the next 2 to 3 years. And I've had to tell a lot of them, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, some agencies just aren't even sellable because everything is tied to the owner. If you've got a 3-person agency and everybody's there because of you personally, you can't sell that business. It's just not going to happen. And so you've got to focus on building something that you want. If you do, if it's something that you enjoy doing, if you've taken yourself out of the day-to-day, you will be attractive to somebody.
Yeah.
And if it's a deal that works for you, fantastic. If not, you've still got something you enjoy.
Yeah. It took me a good year to 2 years to learn how to be an employee after I sold my agency to a PR firm, because we're bosses for a reason. Like, a lot of us become unemployable, and that's just the bottom line. And so, I've also coached a lot of agency owners out of wanting to sell by building an agency that works for them. And if they can take themselves out of the day-to-day, now you can earn that paycheck into the next stage of your life, that kind of thing. So,
right. Yeah. I mean, look, there's plenty of good reasons to sell. I've sold businesses but they're not for, because I think it's this giant payday. It's because it was strategic at that stage of my career or my life or whatever. And as long as you accept that, you're fine. If you're expecting it to be that gravy train, you're going to be sorely disappointed.
Big time.
9 times out of 10.
Yeah. So some random rapid fire questions for you. The first is, what's something that you are binging the heck out of these days, whether it's a show, a podcast, a book, something that a hobby?
So I probably on the hobby side, I have in recent years really become obsessed with sports photography. So pretty much all of my waking hours that I am not doing my day job, I am out photographing high school sports here in New Hampshire. And so I do probably 8 to 10 games a week.
Wow.
I'm just completely obsessed with it. And in recent years, I've also added on portraits and headshots too, just for fun, because you got to pay for all the gear that you use for sports photography, which is darn expensive.
Very cool. I love that. I'm sure the athletes and their families love it also. So that's very cool.
They do. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. What's a new tool that you've recently integrated into your life, work or personal, that you look back and you're like, how the heck did I live without this? Whatever.
A new tool. Actually, the new tool is, and you can't see it, it's just out of frame here. I have a giant digital clock that sits on top of my monitor, and it allows me to stay on track with my coaching calls and with my podcasts, because I can actually see very easily and it's not the usual checking your watch or looking down or anything like that. And so it allows me to, like you, I like podcasts that are 30 minutes or less. So I use it to try to make sure, okay, I know I started at this time. This is when I'm going to end, because I don't know, my eyesight's not good enough to see the time left on the screen, here in the recording software.
Yeah, it's tiny over there. I forget to look at it, even on coaching calls. And then finally, what is just a super invaluable piece of business advice that you can share with agency owners?
I mean, really, it's focus on your own satisfaction. Nothing else matters. There's no reason to take on all the risk, all the stress of being a business owner if you're not getting what you want from it. And that means focusing on all aspects of it. You don't necessarily have to love every day. There are going to be parts of our job we hate. There are going to be days that we're like, why are we doing this? But more often than not, you have to feel satisfaction from it. And if you don't, there's no point. I mean, life is too short to be miserable.
Yeah, love that. Live by that. That's a good one. Thank you, Chip. I appreciate your time. It's an honor to have you on here. So thank you for joining me.
It was great to be with you, Steve.
Thanks again for tuning in to Agency Bytes. If you know someone with expert knowledge on a topic that agency owners would love to hear about, go to agencyoutsight.com/podcast-guest and nominate them.